What happens when a racist officer arrests a black woman outside a bank, assuming she doesn't belong, only to discover she's the bank's owner? In seconds, an ordinary morning spirals into a shocking confrontation. They thought they had power over her, but they were about to learn who really held the keys. The morning sun shimmered across the tall, glass windows of Midtown Financial Bank, its polished facade reflecting the hustle and bustle of downtown. People in suits carried briefcases, while others hurried past with coffee cups in hand. Among them was Vanessa Mitchell, her heels clicking confidently against the pavement as she approached her bank. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, her caramel skin glowing in the soft sunlight, Vanessa carried herself with the kind of assurance that comes from years of hard work and success. Her sleek black car was parked neatly in front, its presence drawing a few lingering glances from passers-by. But Vanessa paid no attention. Her mind was focused on the day ahead, a team meeting, a review of loan approvals for small business clients, and a strategy session for expanding their community outreach programs. As she adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase and headed toward the front doors, she couldn't help but smile. This was her dream realized, a thriving bank she had built from the ground up, serving her community with pride. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with quiet efficiency. Tellers assisted customers with polite smiles, the soft hum of printers and keyboards filling the air. Vanessa stepped through the glass doors, greeted warmly by her staff. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," said Maria, the head teller, with a cheerful nod. "Morning, Maria," Vanessa replied, pausing for a moment to survey the room. The bank was lively but orderly, just how she liked it. As she made her way to her office, Vanessa noticed two men in police uniforms standing near the street outside. She didn't think much of it at first, just officers on a routine patrol. But as she glanced back through the glass walls of the bank, she saw them staring. Not a casual glance, but the kind of stare that lingered too long, brimming with suspicion. Vanessa's brow furrowed slightly, but she brushed it off. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated because of her appearance. She had learned to ignore the subtle biases and quiet judgments that often followed her success. The officers, Brad Daniels and Eric Collins, exchanged a brief look. Daniels tilted his chin toward Vanessa, muttering under his breath, "You see that? Fancy car, expensive suit. Bet she doesn't belong here." Collins hesitated. "Looks like she's working, Brad. Maybe she's legit," Daniels scoffed. "Or maybe she's up to something. Let's go check it out." Without waiting for his partner's agreement, Daniels strode toward the bank doors, his hand instinctively resting on his holstered weapon. Collins followed reluctantly, glancing nervously at the bustling street around them. Inside, Vanessa had just set her briefcase down on her desk when the glass doors swung open. She turned, startled, as the officers marched in. "Excuse me, ma'am," Daniels barked, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the bank. Vanessa straightened, her calm demeanor not betraying the flicker of annoyance she felt. "Yes? How can I help you?" The officer's sharp gaze roamed over her, from her sleek suit to her perfectly styled hair. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa tilted her head, her tone calm but firm. "I'm working. Is there a problem?" Daniels smirked, folding his arms. "This isn't exactly a place you'd expect to see someone like you. Working." Her jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "I own this bank." Daniels let out a low, disbelieving laugh. "You? Own this bank?" Collins shifted uncomfortably, his hand grazing his radio. "Maybe we should just—" But Daniels cut him off. "We're going to need to see some ID, ma'am." Vanessa sighed, reaching into her briefcase. "Fine, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't harass my staff while you're here." As she handed over her ID, Daniels barely glanced at it before sneering. "This could be fake. Let's not take any chances." Vanessa's patience thinned. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. If you'll just—" "Enough," Daniels interrupted. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The room froze. Gasps echoed from the staff and customers as they watched the scene unfold. Maria stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Sir, you can't— She's— Stay out of it," Daniel snapped, glaring at her. Vanessa stood tall, her voice unwavering despite the humiliation washing over her. "This is a mistake, and I promise you'll regret it," Daniel smirked. "We'll see about that." And with that, he cuffed her wrists, dragging her toward the door as the stunned crowd reached for their phones, recording every second. The click of the handcuffs was sharp, echoing like a slap in the silent bank. Vanessa stood frozen, her heart pounding. The cool steel around her wrist felt surreal, like something out of a bad dream. "Is this really happening?" she thought, her breath catching. "Let's go," Daniels barked, his grip firm as he tugged at her arm. His voice oozed with misplaced authority, laced with condescension. Vanessa lifted her chin, refusing to let him see her falter. "Officer, you're making a mistake," she said, her voice calm but firm. Daniels sneered. "The only mistake would be letting someone like you walk out of here unchecked." Behind them, gasps rippled through the room. Maria took a step forward, her hands trembling as she tried to interject. "Wait! She's not—" "Stay back," Daniel snapped, pointing a finger at her. His sharp tone cut through the air, silencing Maria. Customers stared in stunned disbelief, some clutching their phones, recording the scene. Whispers broke out like ripples across a pond, their words filling the tense space. Did they really just cuff her? She said she owns this place. Why isn't anyone doing anything? Vanessa's mind raced. The humiliation burned, but she wouldn't let it break her. This wasn't about her pride. It was about standing up against the blatant disrespect unfolding before everyone. "Officer," she said again, her voice steady despite the storm inside her, "you've misjudged me, and I strongly suggest you reconsider." Daniels let out a low laugh, his grip tightening on her arm. "I don't think you're in a position to make suggestions, ma'am." Collins, standing a few steps behind, looked visibly uncomfortable. "Brad," he said, his voice quieter now, "maybe we should check the ID again." "She—" "Not now, Collins," Daniels interrupted, not even sparing him a glance. "We're doing this by the book." Vanessa couldn't hold back her sharp retort. "The book? What book are you following where you arrest someone for sitting in their own office?" Her words sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Enough," he snapped. "You can explain yourself downtown." The humiliation deepened as Vanessa was led past the wide-eyed customers. Every step felt like a spotlight was on her, the weight of every gaze pressing down. Yet she held her head high, her expression calm and unshaken. Outside, the midday sun was glaring. The bustling city seemed to pause as the sight of a handcuffed woman in a sharp suit caught people's attention. A few pedestrians slowed down, confusion etched on their faces. "Get her in the car," Daniels muttered, guiding Vanessa toward the police cruiser parked just outside. Vanessa glanced over her shoulder at Collins, who was lingering hesitantly near the sidewalk. His unease was apparent, his eyes darting between her and Daniels. "Officer Collins," Vanessa said pointedly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You seem to have some doubts. Maybe you should listen to them." Collins looked startled, his face flushing. "Collins, quit dragging your feet and help me out," Daniels barked, unlocking the back door of the cruiser. Vanessa sighed, shaking her head slightly. She could feel the anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior, but she knew better than to lash out. Years of navigating spaces where she was underestimated had taught her the power of composure. Before stepping into the car, Vanessa turned her gaze to Daniels. "You think this is over?" "It's not," she said simply, her voice steady as stone. Daniels smirked. "We'll see about that." From across the street, a bystander shouted, "What did she do?" Daniels ignored the question, slamming the car door shut behind Vanessa. But inside, doubt flickered in his eyes. As the cruiser pulled away, Vanessa's thoughts turned to the phone in her bag, which had been confiscated during the arrest. It didn't matter. She had memorized the number she needed, and once she had the chance to make a call, everything would change. Meanwhile, back inside the bank, Maria and the staff were in an uproar. "How could this happen?" Maria exclaimed, her voice trembling with frustration. "She's the owner." "She told them that, but they didn't believe her," a younger teller replied, shaking his head in disbelief. "We have to do something," Maria declared. "We can't just let them treat her like this." The crowd of customers had thinned slightly, but those who remained continued to talk, their outrage growing. Outside, the bank's doors swung open as a sleek black car pulled up. A tall man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Where is she?" he asked Maria, his voice calm but commanding. The staff recognized him instantly. Mark Hendricks, Vanessa's trusted business partner and friend. Maria rushed to explain what had happened, her words tumbling out in a flood of urgency. Hendricks' jaw clenched as he listened. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "I'll take care of it." He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen. Whatever conversation. was about to happen, it would shift the balance of power in ways Daniels couldn't have anticipated. Vanessa sat rigid in the back seat of the police cruiser, her wrists heavy with the cold bite of the handcuffs. She stared out of the window, her sharp mind racing. Centennial Avenue, usually familiar and bustling, now felt alien. She had driven this road 1,000 times, but this journey was different. I'll remember every second of this, she thought. Her breaths were measured, her expression calm, but a storm brewed beneath her composed surface. Vanessa wasn't the type to crumble under pressure, and right now she was carefully crafting her next move. In the front seat, Officer Daniels glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his smug expression betraying his sense of authority. Got something to say? He sneered as if daring her to speak. Vanessa didn't flinch. Instead, she turned her attention to Collins, the junior officer sitting stiffly in the passenger seat. His discomfort was palpable. Brad, Collins murmured, barely audible. Are we sure about this? What if... Daniels cut him off, his tone sharp and dismissive. Don't second-guess me, Collins. You saw how she was acting. Suspicious as hell. Trust me, people like her always have something to hide. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she kept her silence. People like me, she thought. The phrase echoed in her mind, fueling her resolve. The squad car pulled into the station's lot, the flashing lights reflecting off the glass windows of the surrounding buildings. The officers stepped out first, Daniels opening Vanessa's door with deliberate roughness. Out, he barked. Vanessa complied, stepping out of the vehicle with her head held high. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. Inside, the sterile smell of the station hit her like a wall. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above as Daniels led her to the processing area. The officers behind the desk looked up, their brows furrowing as they noticed her crisp navy pantsuit and confident demeanor. Who is she? One muttered under his breath. Daniels smirked. Just another wannabe trying to cause trouble? Vanessa clenched her fist behind her back, swallowing the indignity of being treated like a criminal. She knew this wasn't the time to argue. Not yet. The fingerprinting, the mugshots, it all happened in a blur. But what stood out were the glances from the other detainees. They knew. They saw it. She didn't belong here. Finally, Daniels motioned her toward a holding cell, but Vanessa stopped in her tracks. I'd like to make my phone call now, she said, her voice steady but firm. Daniels rolled his eyes. Sure, sweetheart. Make your little call. Not like it's gonna help. Vanessa ignored him, taking the phone and dialing a number she knew by heart. Each ring felt like an eternity, but when the call connected, her voice was calm and deliberate. James, she said, addressing James Parker, the regional director of law enforcement. I need your help. The tone of her voice immediately shifted the energy on the other end of the line. Vanessa, James replied, his voice rising with concern. What's going on? She gave a succinct rundown of the events, sparing no detail. James listened intently, his disbelief quickly giving way to anger. They arrested you? He asked, his voice sharp. Yes, Vanessa replied, and they think they've got it all figured out. I'm asking you to intervene, not for me, but for what this represents. You know I won't let this go. James didn't hesitate. Stay calm. I'll handle it. I'm on my way. Vanessa hung up the phone, her expression unreadable as she handed it back to the officer. Finished? Daniels asked mockingly. Vanessa met his gaze with a faint smile. Oh, I'm finished. Now it's your turn. Unbothered, Daniels waved her into the cell, locking the door behind her. He turned to Collins, leaning against the wall with a satisfied grin. She really thinks one phone call is going to change anything, Daniels scoffed. Collins didn't reply. His unease was evident, his eyes darting toward Vanessa, who sat calmly on the bench, her posture regal even in the stark confines of the cell. Nearby, a group of officers had begun to notice the situation. Whispers floated through the station. Who is she? Why does she seem so confident? Vanessa stayed silent, but her presence spoke volumes. The storm was brewing, and it was only a matter of time before it arrived. The air in the station changed the moment James Parker walked through the doors. His sharp suit and unrelenting expression radiated authority. Every officer in the room instinctively straightened their posture, their chatter falling into an uneasy silence. James wasn't a man who needed to raise his voice to command attention. His presence alone did the job. "Where is Officer Daniels?" James asked the desk sergeant, his tone calm but steely. The sergeant fumbled slightly before pointing toward the back. "Offices." "Right this way, sir," he stammered. James didn't wait for a formal invitation. He strode past the desk, his footsteps echoing through the station like a ticking clock. When he reached the bullpen, Daniels was mid-conversation with Collins, leaning against his desk with that same smug grin he wore when arresting Vanessa. "Officer Daniels," James called, his voice cutting through the room. Daniels turned, his confidence faltering for a brief moment. "Uh, yes, sir?" he replied, standing straighter but still trying to maintain his composure. "Let's talk." James's tone left no room for argument. The conversation moved to a small conference room where James wasted no time getting to the point. Daniels, clearly caught off guard, tried to explain himself. "We detained a suspicious individual outside the bank, sir," Daniels began. "She refused to leave when asked and became non-compliant." James's piercing gaze didn't waver. "Suspicious individual?" he repeated, his voice laced with incredulity. "Do you mean Vanessa Walker, the owner of that bank?" Daniels blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "The owner," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," James snapped, leaning forward. "Vanessa Walker, Harvard-educated, accomplished entrepreneur, owner of the bank you thought she was trespassing in." Collins, sitting in the corner, shifted uncomfortably. His hands tightened into fists on his lap. Daniels, on the other hand, was frozen, his face pale as the weight of his mistake began to sink in. "Look," Daniels started, scrambling for a defense. "We didn't know who she was. She looked out of place and—" "Out of place?" James's voice sharpened, cutting Daniels off. "What exactly does that mean? Because it sounds like you're saying her presence alone was enough to justify this baseless arrest." Daniels faltered again, glancing at Collins for backup, but his partner avoided his gaze. "This department has protocols," James continued, his voice measured but firm. "Protocols you've clearly ignored. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? You humiliated an innocent woman, a pillar of this community, and tarnished the reputation of this station, all because you made baseless assumptions." Daniel's shoulders slumped. I didn't mean for it to escalate like this," he mumbled weakly. "Intent doesn't matter," James shot back. "Impact does, and the impact of your actions has been catastrophic." At that moment, a junior officer appeared at the door. "Sir," she said, her voice hesitant, "Ms. Walker has been released from her holding cell. She's waiting in the lobby." James stood immediately. "Good. Bring her to me." When Vanessa entered the room, her composure was intact, but her eyes carried the weight of what had transpired. James gave her a respectful nod before turning back to Daniels. "Officer Daniels," James said, his tone like ice, "I suggest you apologize." Daniels turned to Vanessa, his face flushed. "Ms. Walker," he began awkwardly, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding." Vanessa's expression didn't change. "You're not sorry," she replied, her voice cool and steady. "You're sorry you got caught." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniels looked away, unable to meet her gaze. James broke the silence. "Vanessa, you're free to go. And trust me, this matter is far from over." As Vanessa walked out of the station, a small crowd had gathered outside. Word had spread about her ordeal, and the energy in the air was electric. When the doors opened, the crowd erupted into cheers. Vanessa paused for a moment, scanning the faces of strangers who had rallied behind her. A faint smile crossed her lips. She had been humiliated, but she wasn't broken. The storm wasn't over, but the tide was beginning to turn. The moment Vanessa walked out of the police station, she knew her fight wasn't over. The cheers from the crowd were loud, almost deafening, but they weren't enough to drown out the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had been silenced, humiliated, or treated unfairly and never had the chance to fight back. Vanessa paused at the steps of the station, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. Some people held signs demanding justice. Others raised their fists in solidarity. The energy was palpable. a collective rage and determination that hung in the cool evening air. Someone shouted, "We've got your back, Vanessa!" The words struck a chord deep within her. She turned to James, who had followed her outside, his expression as resolute as hers. "This can't stop here," Vanessa said firmly, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "If we let this slide, it'll happen again. And again." James nodded. "What do you need from me?" Vanessa glanced at the crowd, then back at James. "Everything," she said simply. The next morning, Vanessa sat in the sleek office of her attorney, Rebecca Monroe, a fierce woman known for taking on high-profile cases with relentless precision. Papers and folders were spread across the desk as Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes scanning Vanessa's account of the arrest. "This is textbook racial profiling," Rebecca said, her tone cold but focused. "We'll file a lawsuit against the officers in the department. They need to be held accountable, not just for what they did to you, but for what they represent." Vanessa nodded. "No settlements, no backroom deals. I want this out in the open." Rebecca smirked. "I wouldn't dream of doing this quietly. They picked the wrong woman to mess with." As the lawsuit was prepared, Vanessa began crafting her narrative. She knew that to create real change, she needed to reach beyond the courtroom. Her first step was speaking directly to the community that had already shown her so much support. Local reporters were the first to catch wind of Vanessa's ordeal. Within days, her story was plastered across every news outlet. Headlines screamed for attention. "Racist arrest backfires," "Bank owner speaks out," and "Profiling gone wrong, Vanessa Walker fights back." Vanessa sat across from a journalist during her first on-camera interview, her demeanor composed but passionate. "This isn't just about one bad officer," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's about a system that allows assumptions and biases to dictate who belongs and who doesn't. What happened to me happens to countless others, but most don't have the resources or platform to fight back. That has to change." The interview went viral, her words igniting a fire across social media. Hashtags like #Justice for Vanessa and #End Police Bias trended within hours. People from all over the country shared their own stories of discrimination, their voices joining hers in a growing movement. By the end of the week, protests had erupted outside the police station. The crowd grew larger with each passing day, spilling into the streets and demanding accountability. Activists held signs reading "Justice for Vanessa" and "No room for racism." The chants were loud, unyielding, a chorus of anger and hope that refused to be ignored. Community leaders and local politicians joined the fight, using their platforms to call for change. Even celebrities weighed in, amplifying Vanessa's story to millions. One actor tweeted, "If Vanessa Walker can be arrested outside her own bank, what hope do the rest of us have? This has to stop." Justice for Vanessa. Vanessa attended one of the protests, standing on a makeshift stage with a microphone in hand. The crowd erupted into cheers as she stepped forward, her presence alone a testament to resilience. "When they arrested me," she began, her voice echoing through the streets, "they thought they could silence me. They thought I would back down. But they underestimated not just me, but all of us. This fight isn't about one woman. It's about every person who has ever been told they don't belong. And together, we're going to make sure they can't ignore us any longer." The crowd roared in agreement, their chants growing louder as Vanessa stepped down. She felt the weight of their expectations, but also their unwavering support. Behind the scenes, Vanessa worked tirelessly to build a coalition of activists, legal experts, and community leaders. She partnered with organizations focused on police reform and racial equity, using her platform to amplify their work. Workshops and town halls became a regular occurrence. Vanessa attended every single one, standing shoulder to shoulder with people who shared their stories and demanded answers. "This isn't just about accountability," Vanessa said during one event. "It's about education. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. We need to dismantle the biases that have been allowed to fester for too long." Within weeks, Vanessa's story had sparked a national conversation about police bias and systemic racism. Donations poured in to support her legal battle and fund grassroots initiatives. The movement wasn't just growing, it was transforming into something unstoppable. For Vanessa, the fight was personal, but it was also about something much bigger. She saw the faces in the crowd, the people who had been inspired by her courage, and she knew there was no turning back. Vanessa sat in her living room, her phone buzzing nonstop. Headlines, hashtags, and comments flooded her notifications, proof that her story had struck a nerve. But awareness wasn't enough. Real consequences were what mattered. Within 48 hours of the viral uproar, the police department announced an internal investigation. Officers Daniels and Collins, responsible for her wrongful arrest, were placed on administrative leave. To many it seemed insufficient, a slap on the wrist. But to Vanessa, it was the first crack in their armor. At the station, unease filled the air. Daniels, usually confident, avoided eye contact, while Collins, visibly shaken, couldn't hide his nerves. The weight of the body cam footage loomed over them. "Footage doesn't lie," a colleague muttered as Daniels passed by. He clenched his jaw, knowing every second of that footage. From his mocking tone to his damning comment about Vanessa not belonging was now under review. The police chief addressed the growing outrage at a packed press conference. "What happened to Ms. Walker is unacceptable," he said solemnly. "We are committed to a thorough investigation and ensuring accountability." Vanessa watched from her office, arms crossed. Promises were easy when cameras rolled. Actions, they were harder. Days later, the investigation concluded. Daniels and Collins had violated protocol and exhibited blatant bias. Both were fired, their careers effectively over. While it was a victory, Vanessa knew it wasn't enough. Sitting across from James Parker at a quiet cafe, Vanessa outlined her next move. "This isn't just about two bad cops," she said, her voice resolute. "It's about a system that enables them. We need oversight, citizen review boards, transparency, real accountability." James nodded, listening intently. Days later, the police department introduced sweeping reforms: mandatory bias training, the creation of a citizen oversight board, and a commitment to transparency. Vanessa watched the announcement cautiously optimistic. It was a start, but she knew the work was far from over. "This isn't about revenge," she said during a televised interview. "It's about ensuring no one else has to endure what I did. We've made progress, but the fight isn't over." Her words resonated, sparking protests and conversations nationwide. Vanessa had become the face of a movement, not for her own justice, but for a systemic reckoning. Months later, Vanessa stood in a community center surrounded by activists, leaders, and volunteers. Behind her, a whiteboard was covered in bold ideas. "This isn't just about me," she said, her tone steady yet impassioned. "It's about everyone who's been dismissed or made to feel invisible. We have the power to change that." She outlined plans for workshops teaching people their rights, especially youth. "Knowledge is power," she told the crowd. "We'll prepare them for what they might face, while also equipping them to stand up for themselves." The room buzzed with energy as Vanessa continued. "Partnerships are key: schools, nonprofits, businesses, anyone willing to join the fight. This isn't just about justice, it's about community." She spoke about demanding transparency from law enforcement, public misconduct reports, regular audits, and citizen voices at the table. "We've had enough of band-aids on broken systems," she said. The applause was deafening. The first workshop launched days later, packed with parents, students, and retirees eager to learn. Vanessa guided them through real-world scenarios, patiently answering every question. A teenager raised her hand nervously. "What do you do if an officer's yelling for no reason?" Vanessa's heart ached but remained steady. "Stay calm. It's not fair, but your safety is what matters most in that moment. Fight back later, with your voice and your community." Over the months, Vanessa's initiative gained momentum. She partnered with local schools and nonprofits, securing grants to expand the workshops. Her story inspired others to come forward, sharing their experiences and refusing to stay silent. One letter stood out to Vanessa. "I saw your story and finally reported my own. You gave me the courage I didn't know I had." It was proof that her efforts were making a difference. The changes extended beyond workshops. Vanessa pushed for systemic reform, speaking at rallies and advocating for legislation. Media outlets continued to amplify her voice, turning her resilience into a rallying cry. By the end of the year, thousands had participated in her initiative, their newfound knowledge sparking ripples of change. One morning, Vanessa stepped into her bank, greeted by warm smiles and lively chatter. The atmosphere felt different, vibrant, inclusive, welcoming. Clients of all backgrounds filled the space, their laughter and conversations blending seamlessly. It was the vision Vanessa had fought for, a place where everyone felt they belonged. Later that day, Vanessa hosted a community forum at the bank. Leaders, activists, and residents filled the room, eager to reflect on the changes. "We've made progress," Vanessa said, standing confidently at the front. "But this is just the beginning. Change is a process, not an event." She spoke about the power of collective action, urging everyone to remain vigilant. The applause that followed carried a sense of unity and hope. As the forum ended, a young woman approached Vanessa, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she said. "What you've done here, it gives me hope." Vanessa smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Hope is where it starts," she replied. "The rest is up." To us that evening, as Vanessa locked the bank's doors, she paused to reflect. What had once been a place of exclusion was now a beacon of progress. It wasn't perfect. Change never was. But it was tangible proof that justice and inclusion were possible when people came together. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, Vanessa felt a quiet sense of triumph. Change was slow, but it was happening. One voice, one story, one step at a time.